TKO Boxing with Sherry Abbasi, and this evening I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Luke Thomas of Morning Kombat, a combat sports analyst. Luke, thank you so much for jumping on tonight with me. I really appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to have you on. How are you doing, sir? Are you okay?
I am okay. Yeah, I'm here. Everyone should know that Sherry has put up with a lot of my BS to make this happen because I'm terrible with scheduling, but I made it. So here we are.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Luke. It's not a problem. First things first, Luke. I just wanted to give you a bit of information in terms of what I wanted to ask you today. I was hoping, me myself, I'm a hardcore boxing fan, so I'm not really into UFC so much, but I do listen to some of your stuff, and I've learned, things from that about MMA and whatnot. But for me, I wanted to know your background and how you ended up getting into combat sports in particular, and how you've ended up sort of becoming a boxing and MMA analyst, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit by accident. I'm 44, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Always kind of interested in martial arts. Didn't really take it up in any kind of way until much later in life. But I joined the Marine Corps at age 17, really 18. But I was 18 when I went to boot camp, is the better way to put that. And then through there, I went through the Marine Corps martial arts program by the time I was in college. Took a little bit of judo at the time. Wasn't very good, but, just sort of messing around. And then when I was a teenager, my parents were divorced, and so even prior to that, like, I would spend the summers just not knowing what to do, like a bored 14-year-old kid. And a friend of my dad's was a big martial arts guy. I remember I didn't find UFC till like UFC 4 or something like that. Obviously I grew up in the days of Tyson and Tyson and Holyfield was a big one when I was 17, but in terms of like the MMA side, that's where it all sort of came from. So then around the age of 24 or 25, I started training like, what I would consider relatively seriously, 5 times a week, that kind of a thing. And again, not for any kind of purpose other than I just wanted to do it. And at the time, this is around 2006 or so, there weren't a lot of sites that were doing, I remember I had some teammates who went and fought and I couldn't find any results. I naively thought there would be some and there weren't. So I just sort of started working in that space. One thing led to another, developed a site. The site blew up when MMA got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I parlayed that into gigs in every different direction. In terms of the boxing side of things, again, I grew up in the age of Sugar Ray Leonard, and obviously I live in Washington, D.C., home to Mark Too Sharp Johnson and all kinds of guys. But that honestly didn't come around until a little bit later. Like, it was through a different... I always kind of liked boxing, but MMA ended up being so much work that I just didn't have enough hours in the day to devote to it. So I covered it a little bit around the late 2000s, early 2010s. Had to get away from it when I became an editor at MMAfighting.com. And then more recently, obviously through the Showtime gig, but even before that, I've been able to like really pour into it. And candidly, like, I've found over time, you don't need to pick one. You don't. You can like what you like, and I don't judge people who only like one or the other. But what I will say is they fulfill different needs. They're not exactly the same in what they do for you as a combat sports fan. And so I feel very blessed that I get to enjoy both of them for what ultimately are some similar reasons, but some pretty different ones as well. That's the very fast answer that I can give you.
Oh, no, that was amazing. Thank you. And I think, like you said, they are very different sports and disciplines, if you will. But me, myself, as a boxing fan, I can enjoy both, even though I don't really watch MMA that much. Like this weekend, we've got a massive card which has had 2 dropouts, and you've had 2 potentially even bigger fights for UFC, which is crazy. Which in boxing, you wouldn't see something like that. You just see either the fight gets taken off or the card's cancelled. So, excuse me. That is the beauty of maybe something like a UFC where they've got so many fighters tied up and they can demand that the best fight the best kind of thing. And that was sort of my thought process in the last year or two has been, we're not getting the best fights in boxing. Too much politics, this, that, and the other. But then similarly, we're getting more undisputed champions than we've probably ever seen, in the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So as much as we're getting told, oh, boxing is a dying sport, it's not giving us what we need. We are getting these boxes ticked. Yes, they might take longer than we wanted. For example, Crawford and Spence earlier this year. But we're getting undisputed champions. And this year, for example, Showtime, especially with their pay-per-view fights, have delivered, unprecedented value for money. Yes, Canelo, Charlo maybe didn't deliver what we wanted in the ring, but that was always a possibility with the inactivity, a weight jump for Charlo. What is your opinion on where the sport of boxing currently sits, and then obviously the juggernaut of UFC and WWE with TKO and Endeavor Group merging, where does boxing sit in the combat sport sort of hierarchy, and how can we improve the sport of boxing with this coverage?
I have to tell you, I think a lot of boxing fans have the wrong idea about MMA. And I mean this mostly from the ones who don't watch MMA. And here's what I mean. A lot of them are like, oh, well, listen, first of all, boxing's had a great year. I mean, not a perfect year. No year is perfect, but 2023 has been a strong year. And if assuming that there are no issues and we get Fury versus Usyk, ultimately this will be a really strong campaign. So I want to be clear about that. But here's what I mean when I say that. I see a lot of boxing fans being like, UFC, they make these fights over and over again. To your point, it wasn't just 2 fights. 3 fights fell out. The top 3. Well, the top 2 had the most attention. The other one didn't really have all that much attention. But technically speaking, it was supposed to be Ikram Aliskerov versus Nassourdine Imavov. That fell out, and now he has to take a replacement opponent. But yes, the co-main and main. But there might be a culture inside MMA that's a little bit more next man up than you do get in boxing. That's probably true. But the reality is, MMA is monopolized. Like, there's a gigantic monopoly, and I don't say that as like a good thing. I say it as a thing that I think should be a moment of reflection for boxing fans. Yeah, it's true. You can get guys to fight each other a little bit more nimbly because athletes in that space don't have any rights or protections. That's why, because there's a giant company, and yes, there are independent contractors. They can turn down fights, but when they do, it massively extends their contracts. Like, I know it is frustrating to be a boxing fan and see people in MMA talk about how easy it is to get X versus Y so quickly and whatnot. That's an illusion. That's not real. Like, you should, as a boxing fan, understand that it may take longer to get a Spence versus Crawford, and I know that is frustrating. It should not be easy to get guys, even for big money, who have protections and have rights to sign up for brain damage. It actually should be pretty hard. It should be pretty hard to make that. And so if you get a year where there's a bunch of like really big fights, that is, of course, a cause for celebration in general. But more to the point, I actually feel like, we're in an era where young guys in boxing are looking for the smoke more than they have. Certainly when I was covering it during the Floyd era, I just didn't see anything like this at all. I mean, I'm not here to say that boxing doesn't have its problems and that MMA might be better in certain organic ways than boxing does have problems. That could be true. But the biggest mistake any boxing fan could make is to look at how the UFC runs and be like, oh, we should get that in the industry. No. You should not. The UFC is being sued right now by former fighters for what they allege to be antitrust violations. And they're so far kicking the UFC's ass in court. We will see how far that goes. It has a long way to go. But I really, really challenge folks to, what they want is like the easiness that comes with being an MMA fan. Like, every Saturday there's something on ESPN Plus. Every Saturday. I get that. I get how simple that must seem. I would rather have something of a disorganized sport and the athletes have some measure to guide their careers, to be in charge, to have say, to have protections, to have leverage in contract negotiations, even if it means more friction along the way. It shouldn't be easy to get guys to do this. Now, very quickly, to answer the other part of your question, I don't really know if there's a solution for something as decentralized as what we have. What I can say is, if there is a way to encourage people to do what Errol Spence said prior to the fight with Bud Crawford, which is, we've got to show networks, we've got to show other fighters, we've got to show people, promoters too, that it's okay to take a risk, that there actually can be reward in risk. Because in terms of just changing how the industry functions between sanctioning bodies and the various promoters in the space and where they're going to air on television, these conflicts are inevitable. I don't really know that there is a way to get around that. But if there is a way to get the guys who do the fighting to be more readily incentivized to accept risk, that's a doable path, I think, to get us to perhaps a better place.
Thank you for that answer, Luke. And I think the points you make are all valid. And of course, maybe, like you said, we need to find a happy medium between the UFC having one side of like MMA monopolized, because I don't know enough about it, but I assume you're not going to see a UFC card with PFL or whoever they are. You're not going to see them co-promoting or giving up a percentage of a card. That's not going to happen, is it? So even though we see Garcia versus Tank and we see DAZN and Showtime working together, they have a vested interest in doing that because that was a mega fight in terms of profile of the fighters. But the UFC is never going to give, another organization any sort of clout or credit because they're so big that they don't need to do that. And the fans are flocking to watch most of their cards. So boxing needs these mega events like we've seen this year. We've had Spence Garcia, Tank Garcia, Spence Crawford, and now Canelo Charlo in its own right was a mega event. So boxing, as we're seeing, we need these big events and pay-per-view cards to sort of push the sport forward into the limelight. But with MMA and in particular UFC, we're seeing that they can put on loads of different cards, even just on regular ESPN, and still garner mass attention. What do you think boxing can take from the promotional side with the fighters to sort of get the fighters to have more of a profile and more of a personality online, if that makes sense? Because we are in the era of social media, so you have to sell yourself.
Right. So I will say that on the boxing side, this is not true for the A-list guys, right? But for everyone who's basically not A-list, they're pretty terrible at media. They're pretty terrible. Like, for example, just consider something like this. If I look around on the MMA side of things and I look and I say, okay, current or active or even inactive fighters, retired ones, whatever, how many have active, budding, like content all the time, not on Instagram, not on TikTok? How many have like fresh YouTube channels where they're interviewing other fighters, where they have their own podcasts, they're doing breakdowns? Now, in some ways, these people are taking jobs that people like me used to have, but this is the inevitable consequence of leaning into these kinds of platforms. They're much more ready, much more resilient, much more invested in building online platforms that they can control, that they can monetize, that they have some say over, and they can build themselves, again, in all different kinds of ways. I can name just a dozen or more on the MMA side. I can't think of that many on the boxing side. Now, there are some, but even then there can be like a real hands-off approach where someone's just doing all the filming and they're vlogging, like not the same thing as, hey, I'm going to sit here and answer questions from the fans for 2 hours, right? You just don't see nearly as much of that. And also the other part too is, on the boxing media, I'll never forget the first time I went to a boxing press conference was when Amir Khan fought Lamont Peterson. This was on HBO back in 2011. And I had never gone to a presser where the media was holding up microphones in the fighters' faces and they had tape recorders in them. I had never seen that. I was like, oh my fucking God, like these guys are behind the times. But that's changed now, and I think everything's a little bit more caught up. But the point being was, if I was a fighter and I looked around and I saw guys who had tape recorders, I'd be going out of my way to make sure that I had my own platform where I could get my own video content up. And also, like, you see a little bit of that, like Sean Porter is doing like the Porter way. But imagine there was like a dozen of him. Not quite as big as his podcast, but pretty close. Imagine there was like a dozen or more of those guys on the UFC side. You have that already. So to me, the boxers seem to have a lot of independence in a good way, but one of the things that independence has done is put a wall between them and the media where they either don't participate much in it, they don't have their own platforms that they develop, and as a consequence, even when they do media, it's not very dynamic. The folks don't really know them. They don't get a chance to be out there. They're not filling up these online spaces. Like, there's just a vast void. Last thing I'll say on this, go and check YouTube trending videos on a Sunday or a Monday after a big boxing and MMA fight. Like, compare the two. And what you'll see is for both, whether it's DAZN or ESPN or whoever, here's the highlights of this big fight, MMA or boxing. But I guarantee you what you'll also see on the MMA side is you'll see at least one former fighter whose video went viral from their own channel. You almost never see that in boxing unless it's Sean Porter, and even then, it's not as frequent. There's just a lack of embrace on the boxing side. Again, someone has to kind of crack the whip on them, and otherwise they're going to be where they are.
So just to summarize there, Luke, what I've taken from what you've said is boxers have the freedom. They need to take advantage of that and really maximize what they can, that social media reach. We've got 100 different platforms you can use in this day and age, probably some that me and you may not even use, but they're out there. So they need to maximize their outreach and sort of build a connection with the fans, because I think I used to work in a sales job, like a mobile phone store. And my manager always said to me, people buy into people, or they buy from people. So without creating that connection with the fans, a lot of boxers are missing out on potential pay-per-view buys, people tuning in on just regular TV, and even just hits on YouTube. Like you said, you can monetize that. So they're losing out at the bottom end of it. The people that are losing out are the fighters. So from what I'm understanding, what you're saying is they need to take advantage and sort of educate themselves a bit on all the opportunities they have out there to maximize their profile. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, just think about it, dude. Your window to fight is not long. It's
No.
not. I know it seems, if you're 23 years old and things are going well, it seems like you can do this forever. You have no idea when you're going to be in a car wreck. You have no idea when something bad is going to happen to you. You have no idea about when all of this could come to a halt. You just have no clue. Hopefully it doesn't happen very soon. Hopefully some of these guys can have long careers, but we know the reality. You don't have very long to do this, but what you do have is a grand opportunity to build something else. And I know a lot of folks are like, I don't want to spend a lot of time on my phone. I don't want to spend a lot of time online. I understand that. I genuinely do. But for all these guys who are like, no one wants to fight me, I can't get any kind of media for this, I can't leverage that. I mean, you're participating in your, if that's the way you want to go through life, you are participating in your own minimization. You are participating in your own being passed over for whatever else. Closed mouth don't get fed, man. That's what we say here in the States. Closed mouth don't get fed. Like, you really, really have a short window to take advantage of the fact that people are interested in you. Use it. Use it. The MMA fighters are, for whatever reason, much more willing to dive into that kind of thing in a way that, Sean Porter and a couple others notwithstanding, they simply are not. And it's just a gigantic missed opportunity.
Completely agree. And I think a fighter who I have always looked at and thought he hasn't promoted himself well or hasn't given us a chance to see his real personality this year was Terence Crawford. For many years, he just kept himself, very stoic and answered questions at press conferences. Here and there, you'd see a video where he might show a bit of personality, but they were sort of few and far between. And then this year, after the win against Spence, we've seen not only has he obviously had the biggest win of the year, arguably the best performance of the year, you're seeing him everywhere. He went on a massive media run, and now we've seen his personality. We're seeing videos of him doing all sorts. The parade in Omaha afterwards, which was so many fans out there. Granted, that is his hometown, but people still showed out. They didn't have to. So it shows that people like him, and he has actually built himself up now. It's about him sort of pushing himself and catapulting from there. I don't know if you remember, before they announced the fight, I think it was the week before, he put up on his Instagram, there was a grid of photos of the photo with him holding Aquaman sort of thing in the Bellagio pool, shall we call it. And that was pre the fight being announced. So everyone knew what it meant, essentially, because we knew we were getting there. But I saw so many people online hating on that, saying, oh, what is this? This is, he's not going to take the fight, this and that. Maybe because boxing fans are bitter and fickle and we've been, given so many false dawns over time. But I thought that was a brilliant piece of promotion on his part. Just put that up just to tease. And the fact that it's Bellagio, we know we're going to Vegas. And he teased that. And then he went and did what he did on the night. And I saw your post-fight reaction. I actually flew out, first time in my life. I said, for that fight, I got to be there. Flew out to Vegas, got to witness it in the arena. And as you said, that was a moving sort of experience to sit there and witness one of the best ever performances we're probably ever going to see. Even now, I think I kick myself like, whoa, I was actually there. I saw that live. Can you tell me, I know it's been almost 2.5, 3 months removed. Can you tell me what your feelings are looking back on that night today?
Yeah, and by the way, just to go back to the previous question, what did Terence Crawford do afterwards? He did a media tour, right? That's exactly what he didn't do boxing. He did some boxing media, but he did mostly I think he did Ebro and all these other places that have different audiences. This is what I'm talking about. Like, strike while the iron is hot. Now, it never been hotter than it was for him after that win over Spence. But yeah, dude, I've been to small MMA fights. I've probably been to 1,000 of them. UFC events, I've lost count. Boxing, and I haven't been to as many, but relative to even the average boxing fan, I've been to a lot over the course of the years. I've been to numerous Mayweather events, numerous Pacquiao, numerous Canelo, Spence, Crawford. I mean, I even got to call fights with Breadman at the National Harbor, for fights on Showtime that I'm sure not a lot of people saw. So, I've been very, very lucky in that regard. I've never seen a combat sports experience. I've never had one like that. I've had some big ones. I've never had one like that. The way I try to explain it, and I can't think of a better way, not to say that there isn't one, I just can't think of one. I used to see when I was a kid, my mom would show me the three tenors, like Pavarotti and all these guys, these Italians singing this incredible opera. And you would see these people in the audience who were, especially if they were close up to the stage, they were weeping when the performance was over. And I could internalize what that meant. I could figure out, oh, he sang so beautifully, it brought them to tears. But I couldn't comprehend having art affect me in that way. Now, of course, this is not art we're talking about. We're talking about a real life sporting contest. But the skill of Terrence Crawford in that way, especially because I was doubting that he was capable of that. Quite wrong. I'm happy to say, quite wrong. But the fact that I got to watch, the point was when it was over, I got to watch somebody do something so absolutely magnificent in the way that he did it. Not just, by the way, to the point you're raising about the performance in there, walking out with Eminem, the whole getup he had with the net, the fish net, and he was draped over his shoulder like he was a man on a mission. And he had been kind of shit on by boxing media, partly because you're right, he didn't do a great job of outreach himself, and I know he had beef with Bob Arum and the whole 9 yards. We don't need to repeat all that. So there was a lot going into that. So from the beginning to the end of it, and I was there all fight week, we got to interview both guys and everything, I had just never seen something, I had never seen a maestro so in control to the point where I wasn't going to cry. I didn't quite feel it that way, but I felt like, oh my God. And I said when it was over, you heard me say it, I don't know if I'll ever attend another combat sports event where somebody does something like that. I just don't know if I will. Maybe I will. I'll get lucky. That'd be great. But if not, that will be the high water mark for sure.
And I think it's also the size of the occasion, how historically significant that was. Undefeated, undisputed, unprecedented. Two undefeated fighters who we knew were 1A and 1B, whichever way you spin it. We just need to find out who actually was the guy. And then to go out and do that and make it that one-sided.
Right.
But also, I want to stress as well, and I'm sure, as you've done previously as well, Errol Spence deserves all the credit in the world. He showed no sign of quit, regardless of, you might say, oh, he's too brave for his own good. That's fine, but they've signed the contract to go in there. He could have easily bottled it and just, phoned it in, if you like. But he stepped forward, and unfortunately he was stepping forward into a ramrod jab repeatedly. But the point being, he gave his all in that ring. And now, obviously, we know that contractually there is a rematch clause in there with all its complications. Do you see anything else happening in the rematch that we haven't already seen, or do you think there's a chance Spence can turn it around based on what we saw?
Can't go much worse. So the last I heard, right, there was still a disagreement over ultimately what weight they were both going to decide on. I know that Crawford wants to do it again at 147. We all know the story. Spence almost certainly does not, wants to go at 154. I think right after it was over, he changed his Instagram to 154-pound fighter or something along those lines. I am of the belief that, I'll put it this way. I'm of the belief that if they do fight at 154, do I think that Spence can turn in a better performance? Sure. I do think that. It's just real hard to look at that first fight and say he can overcome the technical advantages that a guy like Crawford was able to show. And Crawford's, the game plan that they had with everything from his stance to his particular setup, the way he was moving his hand over and then keeping his other hand to protect against the body, which is always which ways. And, because Spence builds. He lays a brick, then puts another one on top, and then it just becomes like that. But if you can deny him the initial sort of foundational building, he can't really ever get into second gear, which is what they did to him in addition to landing on him. But they denied him all of the ways in which he is able to build these foundations. They looked nothing like the Ugas fight. And of course, Crawford is very different from Ugas. But the point I'm trying to make is, do I think that there's a world where Spence can do a better job than what happened on July 29th? Sure, I do. I do believe that. But I just have a hard time looking at that and thinking, okay, even if he has, better weight cut at 154 and blah, 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 and better punch resistance, okay, all right, fine. Do you see him beating Bud? Winning 7 rounds, knocking him down, knocking him out? It seems so unlikely at this stage. And for the last thing I want to say on this too, when they clinched up, this was the part that really got me. I couldn't believe it. Spence with his high elbow frame, Bud with his high elbow frame and his ability to push off, he looked like the stronger one of the two, which I could not believe. Of all the things I thought I was going to see, I never thought I was going to see that, and you did. So I'd be okay with it if they do it at 154. If it's another 147, it seems like a gigantic waste of time, but they pulled the rematch clause. Let's see what they do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think speaking of sort of bigger and stronger man, we have seen little clips of Crawford in the gym doing lifting crazy amounts of weight, and we've always heard in the boxing fraternity that he's freakishly strong, even though he is maybe not the biggest guy. So that was kind of already set there, but I don't think we until we saw it in the ring that night against someone as big and strong as Errol Spence, do you really take note and sort of visually once you see it, you can't escape that. Hearing it's one thing, seeing it's something else. And speaking of bigger men, just wanted to touch on Canelo Charlo. I know this is recent and you've already spoken about it at length. Since we've sort of moved away from the fight week, nearly 2 weeks, well, sorry, just over 2 weeks, have you had any sort of other thoughts about what happened that night and what the next move should be for someone like Canelo or Charlo, even with Tszyu this weekend as well?
Yeah, I mean, Charlo bottled it, right? I mean, he did. He bottled it. I didn't think he had a great chance of winning, but I thought it was possible, especially because Canelo hadn't looked great up to that point. I thought he could have a chance if he really was trying to make it an activity, a volume kind of clash, which ultimately would open him up to more damage, but would at least let his game going in some direction. And he just decided not to. And, you know, it's kind of funny. I didn't think it was like the most disgraceful thing. I think it was a profoundly. I think he'll regret it long term. But I'm not like personally holding a grudge. You know, in some ways that I've seen other people do. By the way, I will say the boxing community is vicious. Boy, the criticism is. I mean, it is unrelenting, even for the very best guys. It's like it's hard to deal with sometimes. But the thing I'd say is, I thought Canelo looked good at times, very good, not quite great. Didn't love rounds 10 to 12 performance, but right up to like round 9, I thought he looked really sharp. That round 7 was sick. You know, for Charlo, I'll say this, man. I think Tszyu, especially this past weekend, coming off the Brian Mendoza win, that was an even fight through 6 rounds. In round 7, he took over and then went downhill on him. And I have to tell you, I think Tszyu, you know, when he fought Gaucher, I was like, okay, it's a nice comeback performance because remember he got dropped early, but I didn't quite know what to make of it. Then he has the Harrison win, and now he's got this one. Those are the two ones that I care about the most. And you could say, oh, Mendoza's not like of that level necessarily. Harrison's old, whatever, dude. Those are quality wins, however quality you want to say. They're not scrubs. And I just feel like he's been really fine-tuning things, trying to figure out exactly how to get his identity, his game, his way in which he wants to pursue fights. Through that, he's gone 12 rounds multiple times. I think by the time he gets in front of Jermell Charlo, like, don't get me wrong, Jermell Charlo still has one of the best left hooks in the game. He's still a big power puncher at 154. That is not going to be an easy thing to defeat, even if his stock has been lowered by virtue of his performance against Canelo. But I think Tszyu is going to make sure Jermell Charlo has his hands full. I do think he is a legitimate upset threat. On the Canelo side, man, this is real simple, right? This is not very difficult. And I'm sure anyone watching this who's a real boxing fan will agree. Not that I speak for them, but I'm pretty sure I got at least this one right. It's only Terrence Crawford, and more likely it's only David Benavidez. Period.
Yeah.
I don't give it. Now if Benavidez loses to okay, so we have Brazilian fighters in MMA when they have that name. On Andrade, we pronounce it Andrade, so I might mess it up, but
That's fine.
Demetrius Andrade. But Andre's a good fighter, but I mean, after what he did to Plant, I'm like, Team Benavidez, they got something going here. It's that, dude. And if they can't do that one, I would take the Crawford one, but I don't know how the timing on that's going to work, especially if he wants to come back for Cinco de Mayo. Dude, give me David Benavidez versus Canelo Alvarez now, tomorrow, every time. That is one of the biggest fights you can make in boxing. Even though I know Benavidez is not a huge pay-per-view star yet, I get that, and he's not going to, this fight against Andre is not going to do gangbusters on pay-per-view. I suspect it'll be a modest draw. But the quality of that win will be high, and the importance of the Canelo fight will never be more better than what it is after that. That's the fight to make. Or you can slot in Crawford if there's a way.
Absolutely. I think, like you said, the Crawford fight is more of a fantasy fight because we know there's a massive weight disparity, and we've seen in boxing history some fighters have managed to go up through weight divisions and they've been fine, but that's sort of again a rarity, and this is a big jump. Two top pound for pound guys going against each other. They always say a good big one beats a great little one, or whatever the saying is. I've just butchered it, sorry. But I think naturally, like you said, the best fight to be made would be David Benavidez versus Canelo in terms of the size, the weight, the two Mexicans, Cinco de Mayo, everything is perfectly set now. And even Mauricio Sullivan has said that the WBC mandatory will have to be called in March, and that's set up for Cinco de Mayo perfectly, isn't it? Because he's the interim titleist. Canelo's obviously not a massive combination puncher anymore like he used to be at 154 and 160. He's a lot more cerebral, methodical, shall we say. The big loading up on the left hook to the arms, the thing that he did against Callum Smith when he first came up to 168. David Benavidez is more of a combination puncher. We've seen over the years he's had some great highlights doing what he does. Who has the best chance of winning this fight? And in my head, I always think with Benavidez going after Canelo, I think he's giving Canelo every chance to hurt him. I'm not saying he can knock him out and stop him, but I feel like he could deter him, shall we say, or put him in his cage a little bit. How, if you had to visualize it, how would you see the fight playing out, and who has the best chance of really toppling the other? And I appreciate timing and age and all that, but what do you think for now?
Yeah, I think David Benavidez would have a real chance. Now, I would favor him not by a huge amount. I would favor him by a modest to slight amount, but I would favor him. I think that, first of all, he's gotten in great shape. Like, he really has. He's maximizing, the size of 168 in a great way. Like, the way he looked against Plant was so... he finally had a little bit of abs, but he also he wasn't leaned down. He was almost kind of filled out, but not with the extra unnecessary weight, but with like helpful bulk muscles. Like, he really had something going for him there. And, Plant's obviously a very different fighter than Canelo, but I'm saying Plant was kind of crafty early, touch and go, and David Benavidez had kind of a slow approach, but dude, when he started moving downhill, it was fucking over. Now Canelo has a lot more power, a lot more craft, a lot more experience than even a good fighter like Caleb Plant. So I think early that would be a Canelo fight. I think Canelo would deter him. I think Canelo would get him to cover up. I think Canelo would confuse him. It's the second half of that fight that would be interesting, and in particular the last fourth of it, if you want to break it up into that sort of chunks of 4. So essentially rounds 9 through 12, dude, I think David Benavidez is going to win all of those. And the question is, how badly does he win those? By what kind of margin? Or I should say that would be a third, excuse me, not a fourth. But you get the idea. That last chunk of the fight, whether it's 10 to 12 or 9 to 12, I think that a guy like Benavidez would be absolutely terrifying in a space like that. Benavidez, oftentimes, you can see this on the tape, he goes square a lot, and he'll cover up, but he's very hittable. But I think his ability to march Canelo down would be kind of interesting, especially as Canelo slows, taking some of his punches without being deterred in terms of his movement, firing back in combination, especially as Canelo gets pushed along the ropes. Canelo is crafty. It would be hard, but Benavidez, either guy can beat the other guy. But if you wanted to find a guy, like, what would it take to beat Canelo? It would be a big guy, natural for the weight class, fast hands, combination puncher, durable, and then mean down the stretch. Dude, that's that guy. That he has the skills. So could he put them all together on fight night? I don't know, but I'd love to find out. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we do get that fight next year. I think it's time. How much does Canelo's legacy and pride come into this fight? Because when you were talking about the last stretch of the fight, 9, 10, 11, 12, and Benavidez coming on strong, in my head I was just thinking, how much will Canelo really have to dig deep and really make a stand if that is the case, and that's how the fight did play out? Because Canelo is, as we know, he's very proud. He's a strong fighter, and he's got that sort of thing about him where his legacy, whatever people say, detractors and whatnot, and you can nitpick his resume, weight class, and catch weights and all this sort of stuff. You can do all that. That's fine. But he's a proud man, and he's a guy who loves boxing. How much will his legacy and pride come into, first of all, getting that fight made, number one? Will he take it? Number two, how much does that then play into the actual result? Because Benavidez still, even though I think he's a 2-time super middleweight champion, I don't think he's hit anywhere near his peak yet. That's the scary thing about Benavidez.
No, it's so true. I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? So one of the things, you were not there for Canelo Charlo.
No, I didn't come for that, no.
Yeah, so I was in Vegas for that, and one of the things that was not the top line of conversation, but maybe just below that, were these conversations about, okay, who are the best Mexican fighters of all time, and where does Canelo fit on that list? And I saw every reaction you could imagine. I saw some folks saying he doesn't belong on the list of the top 5, even top 10. I saw others being like he would be top 5, or some even putting him even higher than that. Again, I let boxing historians kind of decide that, but it was it was a pretty consistent level of conversation about it. And beating Charlo, or even facing Charlo, it wasn't like that. Like, it didn't. Him fighting Charlo didn't really hinge on that, especially in the end, because he kind of just won relatively easily. It didn't move his position up or down, right? So it didn't affect that. But this one would. This one would. And I think Canelo knows that. I think Canelo knows that, and obviously Benavidez has some mixed ancestry as well, but certainly identifies with the Mexican part of his ancestry very closely, as well he should. I think beating a guy like Benavidez, especially at 168, in the state of the career he's in, I'm not saying it puts him above, pick your favorite Mexican fighters of all time. I'm not saying it puts him necessarily in the top part of that conversation, but I bet you, if he goes in there and fights David Benavidez and like really fights him, not just technical in the front half, but kind of physical to the extent that he needs to be and can be down the second half, and he wins that, I guarantee you he and his team and the people around him and some other folks as well are going to start making the conversation about putting him in some of these loftier places. They're going to advance it in a way where, like, see, this is now a reason among everything else he's already done to put him there. And again, I'm not here to tell folks that they have to acquiesce to this or agree with it, but to the point you're asking about his pride, like, I think it does matter to him very greatly that he be remembered among the all-time greats that Mexico has created in its illustrious history in boxing. There's just no doubt in my mind that that matters to him. So for that reason, and also because it's not exactly like, there are already people who are like, Canelo's kind of skipping this fight and skipping that fight and, going up here. If you don't take the Benavidez fight on time, I don't know how you could avoid those criticisms from being an avalanche, quite frankly. So I think if assuming he gets through Andre and they can make it in a now again, maybe Benavidez can't make it for May, he gets injured, whatever, I don't know. But if they can make it, I guarantee you Canelo's place among all-time Mexican greats will be a part of the pre-fight conversation. It'll be a part of the post-fight conversation. And I think to some degree it will power him in the fight itself. Well, whether it will make a winning difference, I can't say.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Luke. That was very in detail. Just as we wrap up, I had 2 very quick fire questions for you. The first one was, I know pound for pound is all mythical and we don't actually know what the definition is. Everyone has their own spin on it. For you, the 3 top fighters in boxing today.
Ooh. Naoya Inoue is either 1 or 2. Bud Crawford is either 1 or 2. Ooh, after that's
where it gets difficult.
Yeah, because those two are just, forget about it. Now, for your audience's sake, I don't do pound for pound in MMA either, because I find the debate fun, but ultimately just really hard to do anything useful with, unless somebody's like crazy, like a Naoya Inoue or a Bud Crawford. So 3, and I don't know where boxing heads have him. I'm only just going to, again, I don't do one of these lists in either combat sport. I'd probably put Usyk maybe on that list. Probably. I know he's not fully Fury still has a WBC belt, right?
Yes,
still?
He does, yeah.
So Usyk is not undisputed yet, but shit, dude, what he's done, obviously just cleaning out cruiserweight and then doing everything he's done now at heavyweight, he'd probably be number 3 on my list. So yes, I'll go Bud, Naoya, Usyk. How about that, Alexander?
But by December, this is the interesting thing, just to add onto your list there, Inoue has just announced he's fighting for the undisputed title in December.
Tapalis.
Yes,
I forget to pronounce his name. Yeah.
So you'd assume, obviously it's boxing, anything can happen. You'd assume he'd be a heavy favorite to win that. He's then gone double undisputed in the space of 12 months. Crazy. Within 2 fights.
Insane.
And then if somehow Usyk does what people think is going to be very, very unlikely, because due to sheer size as well as skill, if he then beats Fury, he's gone undisputed in cruiserweight and undisputed. So either way, we could finish the year with 3 fighters who have done 4 belt twice. Undisputed cruiser and heavy for Usyk, undisputed, but is it bantam or super? I think it was bantam and super bantam for Inoue, and then super light and welterweight for Crawford, which is
That's
crazy. In
insane.
my head, that is crazy. So
That's
again,
insane.
as much as we
We
get
would be
told,
very lucky to get something like that. That would
and
be
then
historic.
and I think that that would then put this as one of the best years, which we were saying it is anyway. But that would really stamp it
For
and
sure.
push that narrative home. Last question for you, Luke, if you don't mind. You yourself, you are an analyst, a journalist, someone who breaks down fights. So you've got a job where you have to really analyze things and look into the little nuances of fighters and stuff, and the stylistic sort of matchups. So I'm hoping you don't take yourself too seriously in terms of the spotlight for you as a journalist and a reporter and analyst is on the fighter and the product in front of you. In your opinion, though, I want to ask this. What would you like your own legacy once you're retired, once it's all said and done, and you're an old man chilling at home, retiring? What would you want people to remember you for in terms of your contribution to combat sports?
Oh, this is easy. This is super simple. I already know the answer to this because I've already kind of felt a little bit of it, which isn't to say that I've done a magnificent job, but I've gotten hints of it. The best compliment I've ever gotten, and the one that makes me feel the best about what I do, is, again, in combat sports, it can be hard to hold people of power to account, especially in MMA, where the industry is, I don't know if boxing fans know this, of every dollar made in MMA, the UFC makes 90 cents. Like they're just so powerful. I don't know if they can even wrap their head around it. So it's very hard to, as a media member, really challenge that power. They have such control. They have such domination. There's not much that can be done that way. Although I do think it's a noble task to try and tell the truth, where promoters of any variety, boxing or MMA, may not. But that's not necessarily what I most have to answer the question. I would just, I already hear it. It's when someone says, I wasn't a fan of, I'll give an example for an MMA fan. MMA fans, I wasn't even a fan of boxing, but you and Brian or whoever else, or just maybe me, you got me to care about it, and I watched. Or more importantly, they got me to watch something, and then they watched the breakdown, and they got to understand it better. And all of these things, it's not just, hey, I got to watch it, or I got to watch it better. What these do is they deepen your connection to the thing. It actually brings you closer to it in a way where all of a sudden you see it, like a magic eye. I couldn't see the sailboat, and now all of a sudden I can see the sailboat in the middle of the picture. Like, it brings you into the world in a way that it ordinarily doesn't. The only thing that I ever really would want out of this is, I don't imagine, dude, no one's gonna remember us. No one's gonna remember your name. No, only the Muhammad Ali's and shit like that. And even 500 years from now, who the hell's gonna remember him? Probably not many people. It's just a select few. You cannot be these people in all likelihood. But what you can be, hold on one second. My kid was gonna come through and open that door. But here's what you can be. You can be somebody who made someone else become a bigger and better and more a combat sports fan who understood things in a way that was, you enriched their experience. That's it, dude. That's all I care about. I every once in a while I'll get an email from someone who's being like, "Thank you so much for blah 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 blah." And again, I'm sure I fail at this too. But you're asking my legacy. I'm not really interested in one, to be honest with you. I don't imagine that I'll have one. Maybe I will, probably not. But what I can say is, if people along the way who were observers of the work that I did, if they got to have a better boxing experience, if they got to have a better MMA experience, if they got closer to the sport, and that they had if they got to feel what I feel from watching Bud Crawford, because they got to take some knowledge into a fight, and then they got to see it in a whole new way. Dude, these things can have a profound impact on your life as a fan. If I can do that, mission accomplished, dude. I don't really, beyond that, that's it. I don't really care about much else. I don't think much else is even, frankly, doable. So I just want to do the doable and move on about my day.
Absolutely. Luke, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for jumping on today. And hopefully, whenever you're free sometime in 2024, if we do get Benavidez and Canelo, then I'd love to have you back on again just to discuss that fight once we're at that point. As long as Benavidez does a job on November 25th, we'll have to see. But once again, thank you so much, Luke. And if you can just let us know, because I'm based in the UK, so more than likely a lot of UK people are going to see this, where we can find you on social media, please.
Yeah, for sure. This is real simple. You can find me, just go to follow me on Twitter. You can see everything I do from there. So you can go, or X, or whatever the hell it's called.
Yeah.
My name is Luke Thomas, obviously. So my screen name is the letter L Thomas News. L Thomas News. Follow me on Twitter, and everything there will flow thereafter. You'll see everything I do.
And he's got Morning Combat in the bio, so people can see that as well. Just a little
For
plug
sure.
for Morning Combat as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Luke, brother. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you.